right, well, I'm going to get started with some brief introduction to what we're going to be doing this afternoon um, for this hour. My name's Mai Wickstrom. I'm the chair of the Westchester Jewish Council Interfaith Intergroup Committee, and I'm so glad all of you could join us here today to hear April Hampton's story and about journeys to change and the creation of the telling, a gathering of remembrance. We'll have a brief introduction from Abby Marcus, and then we'll hear from April. There'll be time for questions at the end of the program, and what I'll ask you to do is, as people are speaking, to put all of your questions in the chat box, and we'll get to them after April's done talking. Let me just tell you a little bit about Abby before I hand the program over to her and April. Abby is a former board member of the Westchester Jewish Council and was the co-founder and executive director at J-Teen Leadership. She's currently the executive director of Journeys to Change Experience, an organization whose mission is to deepen understanding and foster empathy by providing immersive learning experiences that connect individuals with the rich narratives of human and civil rights history. I'm so honored and pleased to have them both here with us today. I'll put a link to the Journeys to Change website in the chat box. And without further ado, I will hand the program over to Abby.
Wow. Thank you so much for this opportunity to educate you about the telling, a gathering of remembrance, but most importantly, to talk about the power of relationships and how we did that through the telling. I'm going to share my screen. I hope it all goes well, just to give you a taste of what this is, of our story. So the telling is a shared experience, and it's a really powerful shared experience through the Black and Jewish community. I started an LLC, an educational consulting organization called JTC Experiences, several years ago, and I built it through my decades of experience in the Jewish education world. Some of you maybe remember me from J-Teen Leadership at UJA, and with the support of Westchester Jewish Council. I also was the educational director at the Workers' Circle. I worked at the 92nd Street Y, Jewish Education Project, and also at Westchester Jewish Community Services. And the one theme, the one thread that I found through all the work that I did at all these wonderful Jewish educational settings was the power of immersive experiences and the power of storytelling. And so that really shaped the work that I did in my LLC. But what I found was when I started my LLC that I wanted to provide my services to anybody that wanted them. And so I transitioned last year to a not-for-profit. So we're a newly formed not-for-profit. You heard our mission. We really are about, learning civil and human rights history through the power of stories and through the power of immersive experiences. Now, my goal is I wish I could take every single person in this country to Montgomery to experience the Equal Justice Initiative by Brian Stevenson. Maybe perhaps you'll give me the opportunity to do that with you one day. But what I found was that not everybody can travel. But what I did find was that you can bring the stories and the people and the experiences here into other places. And so we started to develop other experiences, workshops like the telling, film programs, walking tours, and speakers. We've been working for the past year with just a myriad of different organizations. My passion is for youth and interfaith youth, but I found that it's also equally powerful with schools, churches, synagogues, and professional groups. And so some of our past partners you can see below have been, they keep growing, the people that we're working with, all the Westchester synagogues, some of the churches, private schools, public schools, and it's really been a privilege. So I want to tell you how I met April. In 2021, I was working at the Workers' Circle. I was the education director, and I was bringing some teens for a summer internship in Montgomery with an artist who also thinks of herself as an activist. She's a guide, and she runs a summer camp at her horse farm in Montgomery. So I came with my teens, and um, our artist, Michelle Browder, who you should all learn about as well, said, you know what, I need to spend some time alone with these kids to bond with them. They're very connected to you, Abby. So she called her neighbor, April, and she said, April, do you think you could spend some time with Abby? I need to spend some time with these kids. You need to do something with her and get to know her. I was staying in an Airbnb in downtown Montgomery, right next to where you can see the EJI National Memorial. It just so happens that April has a home right next door to it too. So I was her next door neighbor in the Airbnb. And my friend Michelle said, go over and meet April while I spend some time with your teens. I heard that you're a Jewish educator, and she did something based on a Passover Seder that she's doing for the city of Montgomery. So I went and I knocked on her door, and wow, I didn't realize what I was going to experience. I met her family. I want to go back because I met her beautiful family, although Sterling wasn't alive at the time. Um, and I was really taken with her whole concept of taking a Passover Seder and telling the Juneteenth story for the African American community. So she asked if I wanted to volunteer, and of course I did. And so my first telling was on June 19th, which also happens to be my birthday, in Montgomery. And this is what I was taken with. I was taken with that she created a book that was called The Telling, based on a Haggadah. We all know that Haggadah means the telling. I was really moved that the Haggadah, the telling, opened right to left, and it had all the rituals, but done in a very unique and powerful way to tell the African American experience. My teens and I helped set the tables, and I saw this whole community of people coming from downtown Montgomery with families all dressed up, ready to celebrate and learn this story. And I was really taken by how charismatic and powerful April was. She was just a powerhouse. I was really moved that on each table, she had something called the dual plate. And I'll let her explain that later, but it's based on a Seder plate. And I was just really moved by the symbolism. And again, the way that she carefully, studied the Passover Seder and the Haggadah and created rituals that really reflect the African American story. I was just so moved, in particular by the sugar cane. There's raw cotton on the table. There's salt water. It was just really powerful. So I came back to Westchester after this experience, and I came back with The Telling, the book. And I told my friends, Rabbi Shira Milgram, who at the time was the rabbi at Congregation Kol Ami, and my friend Reverend Trollinger from Calvary Baptist Church, about my experience with April. And they both were leading the White Plains Ministerial Association at the time. And they said, whoa, we want to bring her here. She's coming here. So I got them on a Zoom, and before I knew it, they had arranged for April to come here the following June to lead an interfaith telling through the White Plains Ministerial Association. We weren't sure what to expect. Not that many people were responding, but we said, you know what? The power is for the youth, to really involve the youth. So we involved the youth group from Kol Ami and the youth group from Calvary Baptist Church. We met with them on Zoom. When April came early before the telling, we met with the teens together to form community and told them about their roles in setting the table and doing some of the readings. And it was really powerful. So I want to give you just a taste. I hope this works, but I want to give you a taste of the telling.
Where will people go? To a land they do not. Where will these people go? Where their masters tell them to. What will these people do? Whatever it takes to make it through. What will these people do? What their masters tell them to do. Oh, they say. We shall someday. Amen.
So from that experience, so we didn't know what to expect. Not that many originally registered, but at the actual telling, they had to keep bringing out more tables and chairs, and it was filled to capacity. We're over 200 people there, and it was beyond our expectation. We didn't realize how powerful it would be, and it really met our goals in connecting people, sharing values, sharing stories, making connections. So I'm from Ossining Briarcliff, Congregation Sons of Israel in Briarcliff, and my rabbi had the opportunity to meet April, and he said, wait a minute, we need to bring her to the northern Westchester. We're going to bring her to the Briarcliff Ossining Ministerial Association. So what turned it out from one telling turned into a series of workshops, programs, and other tellings. And we found partnership with Star of Bethlehem Church in Ossining, a very historical Black church in Ossining, and Congregation Sons of Israel partnered in bringing us another telling. And we had the exact same experience where we were sold out and all these powerful connections developed. April was also able to come to the different libraries, do workshops at churches. She met with people at synagogues, and wherever she went, she created, that ripple effect of power and shared values and relationship building. In addition to that, through the work that I do at JTC, bringing groups and schools and churches and synagogues to Montgomery, I often have them come and meet April when they're there. So I know that some of our Westchester community has had a chance to meet April in Montgomery, including Sha'arei Tikva, Westchester Jewish Center in Mamaroneck, Congregation Sons of Israel, and of course Kol Ami. So, the more that she's able to tell her story and share her telling experience, the more it keeps growing. So, one of the essential questions I ask is, why is this so important? Why is the telling important? And, I think for me personally, as running a not-for-profit organization that really wants to fight hatred, anti-Semitism, bring people together, the telling is just a wonderful way to build bridges. And it honors stories and history and rituals, something we can share, and it creates honest dialogue. We try to encourage people to mix up at the telling experience at tables, so that they can have a chance to meet with and experience and reflect after doing the telling experience, and it really helps us understand what we found in doing this is that we often do it to celebrate and honor Juneteenth, that many people don't really understand the importance, the power of the Juneteenth history. And this is a wonderful way to do that. And it's all about relationship building and sharing our values. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to tell you that this has just been such a powerful journey for me to work with and become, I like to say I'm April's Jewish mother, but I think that I'm going to let her tell her story and tell you how she came about doing the telling and why it's important to her.
Thank you, Abbe. And yes, you are. I just had that conversation with my parents. I said, just so you know, I know you guys are really, really jealous of me, but I do have a Jewish mom. My dad said it's okay, just don't tell your mother. But no, I came across, I'm originally from Miami, and my husband is from Montgomery, Alabama. So when we moved back, my husband was a part of a youth organization that worked with under-resourced in a declining Black neighborhood in Montgomery, Alabama. And so a lot of the people that gave to that ministry work were what we call old established white churches. A lot of them sponsored that work. But when they actually got invited to come in to the spaces, their response normally was, well, why do these neighborhoods look like this? Why aren't Black people taking care of their neighborhoods and those kind of conversations? So the guy who originally founded the organization was a white guy, and one of his Black friends. Both their families moved into this neighborhood as an extension of this work of being intentional with their neighbors. So they moved into this highly impoverished neighborhood together to start this programming. Well, once they started getting met with those questions, they wanted to answer honestly that, hey, do you really want to know the truth about why these neighborhoods look like this? So it started a conversation around slavery, civil rights movement, especially as it related to Montgomery, with the intentional efforts by the government and anti-Black groups to derail Black neighborhoods, to destroy Black businesses, and make it so that our neighborhoods were no longer walkable, which was the lifeline at the time of these neighborhoods. And so those conversations kind of started bringing about different young white families that wanted to be more intentional in helping correct some of those ills as best they could. And so we formed a very powerful relationship with a young white couple who had been raised in old white Montgomery perspective, but they wanted something different. And so we decided to be neighbors. We started taking scripture very seriously about what it meant to be neighbors, and the story of the Great Samaritan. And so we couldn't really afford to live in the neighborhood that they lived in. They lived in an old historic neighborhood, so they gave us access to a to the MLS, and so we found a home that I then remodeled, and so that kind of started my other work here, which is historic preservation in residential and commercial spaces. So we were able to live together. We would meet up with prayer and just talk about these issues. And so fast forward, we started praying over the neighborhood now where EJI created the Peace and Justice Memorial eventually. But intermittently, as we grew, our families grew closer. They had a very close friend who was a rabbi, and he asked us if he wanted to do something interfaith, which for Montgomery is a big deal. A lot of times people don't cross over racial lines, nor were they crossing over faith lines. And so he asked, could he host basically an interfaith, we didn't even have that terminology, Seder. He wanted to have a Passover meal with us. So he came, invited his friends and family, and my friends invited us to experience our first Passover meal, which was, we were blown away. Me and my husband, we were the only African Americans there. And we kept looking at each other the whole time saying, oh my gosh, we know these biblical stories so well, but to have it told over the Passover meal and the Seder plate and the symbolism and just the community, it was just really an awing experience of being able to, one, fellowship in this space, in this sacred space with our friends who were who are Jewish and Christian. And then just the way the stories were woven together. We used Haggadah, known as the Open Door version from Sulo. And that was very inspirational because it's a beautiful book. And so I just started looking up. After that, I was like, there has to be something like this. And I've a couple of um, I would say Black oriented attempts, but some of them were very militant and kind of hostile. Um, and I was like, that's not the story. When I read the history of those of enslaved African Americans of my ancestors, I'm seeing this thread of God being with us. They really connected with the story of the Israelites and saying that basically if God can give them freedom, he can give us freedom too. And that started a heart for freedom, I think, within the people, and knowing that it could actually happen. Because if they connected spiritually to God, then he can give them the same freedom that he gave Jewish people. And so it was with that lens that it took me years to study. And my friend, she bought me the book. She knew that I was very interested. So she got Rabbi Max to give me, to buy a version of the Open Door Haggadah. And I just studied it. And I said, okay, God, I think you want me to write this. And I think you want me to tell the story, but you're going to have to help me because I'm not a historian. I don't even really know how to type that well. So just help me. And so over a course of 4 years, I just combed through scripture and remembered poetry. My dad was an avid, he just loved history. So we would read a lot of poems and short stories together and just kind of wove that into the scriptural lens with the help of God to really tell the story because what I gained, one of the things that I gained was that, man, this is a very empowering way to tell a hard story, a story that is very humbling, right? And so, how do we translate this for our children and for the next generation? Because there's so much information about our history out there, but sometimes it's told in a lens that's not that empowering, that really can make one bitter, and become angry to the degree of being paralyzed or suffocating. And so, my goal was to create this storytelling in a shared space centered around freedom, which is the Juneteenth connection. It's not about Juneteenth itself, but it is about freedom. And so we know that Juneteenth is a very important date as it relates to African Americans and slavery, especially in Texas, because a lot of slaves did not get the memo that they were free. And so they got this information late, um, and once they got it, there was celebration. So that's what the telling is about. It's about creating a safe space where people can come together and learn a condensed history. It's definitely not a complete history, but a condensed history that tells enough of our story that one predates slavery, because I think that's important for people. And another great thing that I got from experiencing the Passover is that we're people that God is with us. God created all of humanity. He is with us. He was with us before we became slaves, when we were flourishing in our homeland. He was with us through this journey of being an enslaved people, and He's still with us as a people who are free. And so, and I think that's a message for all of humanity that uh, captivity, though even in a physical form, does not have to define our whole being, because that's not how God created us to be. He created us as a people made in His image and in His likeness. And that if we as humans were willing to start at that baseline at how we see other people, then we would understand how much of a family we really are, and that we're called to be one family. And so this message of the telling is really important for me, because I think that if you try to separate history from the spiritual movement of God, then all you have is a bunch of facts that leads itself to all kinds of interpretations that aren't always good and positive for people. But I think when we remember that God is with us and He's the creator, um, there's a sense of hope that this is bigger than you. And so if it's bigger than you have something outside of yourself to look at. So even if you do feel challenged or bound, you have something outside of yourself and your condition that you can connect with, that can help move you out of your situation. And I think that's true for people, whether they have been enslaved or not. We are all bound by certain conditions, whether it could be our health, family problems, or whatever, that connected to God, we can move beyond that and even interpret what we're experiencing in a way that does not have to destroy us. And I think that's the power of this mutual story, um, of freedom. And as a Christian, I really do connect with the Jewish history, and just the work that God was doing within creating a picture for humanity of what it means for Him to love people, and to desire goodness, even when we don't always know how to, live that out ourselves. But we can have hope in Him that we can be better people together. And that was always His intentionality. And so the telling, from our lens as an African American, telling that story is taking those, like the food elements that are common to the African American soul food experience, and translating that, and really it did the work for itself. As I read about the history of those foods, I was even blown away just learning the source of them and what was done with them. And being a cook, like I love to cook. So understanding that those foods aren't that easy to cook to make taste well, but for some odd reason, those, historically, those foods have been something that once people consume, they love it. But it's a journey, even in how you get there to make those foods great for consumption. So it was a good weaving, and like I said, it tells the story and moves us along with what does it mean to take something that was difficult and take its full expression and see redemptive qualities in it. And so the dual plate, that is the symbolism of it, is that there's this negative connotation that what was meant for evil is now turned to our good. So you have those elements on the table that move that. And even with connecting with raw cotton, which for a lot of African Americans is very triggering because of the history of that. But it's meant as a source of empowerment because we have to reach back and connect, and we may discover that there is some raw hidden pain there, but we have to accept it. We have to connect with it so that we can move on and recognize that as a free people, now we have a choice to touch that product that meant a lot of hurt to our ancestors. And in Ossining, there's a group where tobacco was the harvest, the product that their families used a lot, and so that was represented on the table. So I always challenge families as well to bring out artifacts that they may have from their families that just tell the story and help us connect with their family members. And I think it's encouraging because it says I no longer where I used to be. And so there has been progress, even if that progress isn't perfect. And I think that in this climate, it's important because there are so many things that are trying to derail so many different people groups. Um, and it can be easy to say we see things are the same, and it's not true because people actually did real work. They suffered, they died, they went through a lot of tragedy to try to move the needle along for us presently. And I think to get locked into this mindset that just because we're facing obstacles, that nothing has changed, I think it actually robs our ancestors too of the work that they did and the testimony of all the things that they went through so that we can be here thriving and having these kinds of conversations. And so I think that for us to move forward together as a people, we have to, one, be honest with ourselves. We have to be willing to manage and deal with our pain. And I believe the Passover, the telling, and other things like this can help really empower people if we allow it to one, accept reality for what it is, and then decide how we're going to change and shape reality and still be a thriving people that aren't embittered, that aren't just angry, and then give our kids hope for the future. Because if we're stuck on anger, we're stuck in our issues, then what picture and what reality are we really painting for our children? Why would they even want to exist in the reality that is so disadvantaged and so just clouded with negativity? And so I think it's up to us to really help our children, our younger people, to really be able to process all of the tragedies in our lives, but be able to move forward and be just as resilient as we are. So if you have any questions.
I just want to add too that just so for an understanding of the telling, it's based loosely on the format of a Passover Seder. So the meal is a soul food meal. So when April was talking about how important the food is, there's fried chicken, there's black-eyed peas, there's collard greens, food that African Americans had to make tasty in order to exist, and they've elevated it. So it's a way to celebrate that. There are 4 questions. The children ask 4 questions. They talk about heroes, during the African American journey. There are readings and poems. There's music, just like we have certain standard songs we sing during our Passover Seder. The songs that are woven into the telling are just beautiful. So I just want to give people that understanding of the framework, that it's a real celebration and way to bring families together through food, music, reading, and intergenerational.
Yeah, absolutely, Abby. And so it's again, it's a work of it's scripture combined with the art of African Americans. So you'll find poetry from like Langston Hughes, and you'll have writings from Du Bois and Booker T. So it interweaves. So even the revelation of Coleman is the peanut, because George Washington Carver received the revelation of the peanut, the 200 uses of it. So it's all of those things woven in to tell this spiritual story that can help us feel empowered by our history and the accomplishments of our ancestors. So it moves us from pre-slavery to through slavery to post-slavery, post-emancipation. It also has snippets about the women who played a part in the movement, um, some of the revolts. So it's a very condensed and compact book, and it's also set as a juxtaposition. When you start off in the book, you basically have a question from a man. You have what scripture says about humanity versus what the man is experiencing. And as you move along through the story, it's meant to bring more alignment with scripture and what is actually happening with humanity in that time, to really pull together that power of connectivity with a people, their God, and actually what is happening in the natural landscape that they're existing in, to help really shape the story. That this story has movement, that is something that is constantly changing and shifting as a people is navigating whatever experiences they are, but all with the idea that we can overcome whatever these experiences are. And I think that, again, when I think about the Passover experience that I got to be a part of, that really stood out as a way for families to not like hide and be like embarrassed by this history, but a way of embracing it and saying, this is what things were, and then what are we going to make of what we have and what we've endured. And I think that even as a picture, when I think about the Jewish culture and how, even though as a scattered people, you guys have been able to really still connect over your story and this shared connection, and really make powerful connections. And I pray that through the telling and these types of opportunities, that we as a people are able to forge that type of unity and bond, and then just a way for other people who may not be African American, but to be able to gain a sense of respect and honor and really understand what the struggle has been. And hopefully, with that, have a lens of compassion, so that we all see ourselves as people of who have struggled but who have overcome.
Do you want to moderate some of the questions from the chat box?
Sure. I also I want to mention, I think everybody on the call is aware, but there is going to be um, the telling, they're having one on June 14th in Ossining, and I'll put a link in the chat. And I believe that there's still registration open, Abby. We still have room. So I'm registered and I'm really looking forward to the experience, and everyone is welcome. And I can't wait to experience this firsthand, especially after hearing April speak. Um, so I'll put that in the chat box in a second. There's a couple questions, and please put all of your questions in the chat. One from Jill says, at the Seder, remembering the story, the history, and the journey is so important. How did the African American community, especially the children, respond to this? Could they appreciate resilience and not respond with anger?
Mm. So for the most part, I've had the kids that experience this come up to me and hug me and say, "Wow, that made me feel really good." Like to hear about all of the greats and just this story being told like this. I've had one group that got very angry, and a lot of it really depends on, I think, the place the kids are. So the place where the kid got angry was, I was working with a very well off school. And this kid just didn't want this story. Uh, he didn't like the fact that his friends then centered the story around him, if that makes sense, as the black kid in the room. But after talking through it, he apologized. It was just like an impulsive thing, and he was like, you know what, I really do appreciate um what this was. I just didn't like my peers centering this story in that way around me as if I'm an enslaved person, or that kind of thing. But he was like, it took him a moment to kind of debrief, but once he did, he really was like, I would do this again, and I want to tell my parents about this experience. But for the most part, the kids have been really floored, and it's been great to have interracial um groups with this, because a lot of times the kids are working like a white group with the black group, and so they get to kind of talk about this stuff beforehand. And so there's been some real mutuality, and I think some respect that's come out of it. And that's what the kids have shared with me, that they just really learned a lot, and we're happy that people were enjoying the space with them, eating the food, and like just the positivity around it.
That's great. Thank you, Abby. Thank you, April. Um, I'm curious about what are some of the other elements on the dual plate and
Mhm.
what they symbolize and what the positive and negative aspects of them are.
Sure. So you have the collard green, the black eyed pea, the hoe cake, or it's called hot water cornbread. Then you have the sugar cane. You have the carrot on the plate. On the table, you have the peanuts. You have the cotton, and then you have some other elements like the mud cloth, just to bring in some ethnic quality to the table. But you have, for example, the carrot representing being worked like an ox, but also because it's shaped like a neck, it's the strength of a people, because we know that the neck is what holds up the head. So we have, with the collard green, it represents the bitterness of captivity. So with collard greens, they're generally especially when full grown, they are a bitter um, green, and so leafy green. But the way you cook it, if you cook it the right way, it becomes less bitter, and it gets broken down and it releases the nutrients. And so it becomes a very flavorful food. And so with that, it also represents the wealth, being a green leaf, the wealth of a people, just over time as a community being able to build economic empowerment. Um, and so that's the duality of that. So the bitterness of captivity, the wealth of a people. Then you have the hoe cake, which is very basic. And I think in so many cultures have their expression of it, where it's literally just cornmeal, some water, and a little oil, a little bit of salt. And so you pan fry it, and it's basically just a sustaining food. So it's represented, it represents that, like basically being able to take a little bit and make something nourishing um for the people and for the body. Then you have the black eyed pea, which was brought over on the ships as like animal feed, because it's a really hard bean. And it takes a long time to kind of break down and make it edible. And if it's not flavored properly, you don't want to eat it. So on the plate, it represents that hardness. Um, but then it represents resilience as well, because it after it goes through everything it goes through, it's a beautiful dish. It's a really good food to consume. Um, Again, the raw cotton brings us into a past experience of something that would have been experienced by slaves that worked in cotton fields. So it connects that. And while we go through that activity, I'm talking about the sharecropping family that whose grandson decided to reclaim and redeem cotton in his family. He's a Black guy who decided that he was going to stay in the cotton business, where a lot of people shunned the cotton business just because of the connection to slavery. He decided he wanted to redeem that history. And so it's very connected to the telling and believing in redemptive history. And so that's that connectivity. The sugar cane represents um, it's dipped in salt water. So you get to experience the just the inhumanity of slavery, like that bitter taste to it, but then you get to consume the sweet end. And so that is the freedom aspect of it, the taste of freedom. So those are the types of elements you have on the table. You also have we have communion, and those are some of the elements where, if people don't feel comfortable taking communion, I give them space to just be observers. And that's one of the things that we like to do during the event, is just let all people who are experiencing it feel like they're in a safe space to uh, participate in the telling as they will. And so for those things, we give people space to abstain and just observe. And what we find is most people want to experience the whole thing from an active participant. So when we're reading the readings as the leaders assigning those parts, we're all lifting our voice and participating as if we are there, as if it is first person. And that with that idea, it doesn't matter who's reading. When you read it, you're reading it saying my family experience, because that's what I want people to get out of it, that we are all family and we are all connected to this story. This is not an isolated story just for one group. This is everybody's story.
I love that. The symbolism is amazing. Um, what about people who want to participate who keep kosher, April, with the soul food? Are there modifications or things that they can do so that they can also feel comfortable?
So for this particular telling, Congregation Sons of Israel, when you register, you have to indicate if you want kosher or halal food, and then Congregation Sons of Israel will have some prepared kosher and halal food ready. There's also
Oh, I should.
vegetarian options as well.
Yeah, so typically when I cook, and we'll verify with the group that is cooking this go round, usually the food is vegan. Um, so we use the carrot in lieu of the oxtail. I know one of the pictures it showed a neck bone. We use a carrot, and then usually the greens, the beans, and the whole cake are all vegan prepared. And then at the meal time, though, there may be mac and cheese or chicken or other things, but generally speaking, the food is vegan. Now, this is a traditional African American church. I'm not sure if their cooks are comfortable sticking with that, but that's where for the full meal, the kosher halal packages are available. But it is vegan food is typical in my when I'm actually preparing the food or like being the direct host. That's typically how I prepare it in my household too. We're not vegan, but I try not to put so much meat and things like that. Um, and most of the food is organic. So
Does anybody else have any questions? I have more questions, but I don't want to dominate the conversation. If you're not comfortable using the chat, you could unmute yourself and ask April a question. All right, well, while you're thinking of that, I was very intrigued when you talked about this intentional community that you live in, that you and maybe one or two other people came to these neighborhoods, which were difficult.
Mhm.
And how many people do you have living intentionally in these neighborhoods together? Is it an interfaith community? And how do you define living intentionally, and what um, interfaith or work do you all do together?
So currently now, so that organization has been disbanded and moved in under the auspice of another organization. And so we will volunteer whenever they ask. But in terms of our living situation now, fast forward, that same couple that we initially moved together with, um, we're now living in the neighborhood where EJI is. This is the neighborhood we used to pray about. We used to come and blow the shofar and just walk around the neighborhood because it was a lot of just abandoned homes and just a lot of darkness. And so, fast forward, EJI years later opened up their first campus here. Then, me and my husband, we moved up north. My husband had gotten accepted to Harvard, so we were at the Kennedy School. We were gone for a while. And then, when we came back, our friends had now live in this neighborhood. And so, we bought a home and we fixed it up. And so we live in the west side of Montgomery, um, where things are slowly but surely changing. EJI is doing their work, but on the residential tip, it's just a lot of friends. So now we have another family that just bought the one of the plantation houses. It's a black man and his white wife and their kids. They also believe in redemptive history. So rather than see plantations be torn down, they decided to move into it to redeem that history. We have another neighbor, a black family that moved in. Three of the white families have left since, moved away to Birmingham. Um, and then there's one property that one of our friends, he's a white guy, and it's funny, his mom actually worked under the Trump administration in a high level position, but he is so anti that. But he wants us to own the plantation house that's across the street from us. So that's what we're actively working on so that we can continue that narrative and that these plantation homes are not wedding venues, but they're places of real active storytelling. So we're seeing a movement. It's been slow because the flip side of that is we coming in had to fight redlining. Redlining is still a big deal in the South. And so a lot of people don't necessarily have the means or the banking relationships to just come and buy a big house that's 3, 4, 5,000 square feet and fix it up without capital support. So we invite, and we are slowly but surely seeing friends that are really okay with investing their dollars in these neighborhoods and see them change and reclaimed, especially in light of the fact that we do have so many African American families that watch the decline of this neighborhood. They've been here. We have neighbors that are 90 years old, and they've been through all the cycles where the neighborhood had just allowed Black people to move in to the civil rights um, retaliation of having the expressway run through and destroy the neighborhood. And now they're getting to slowly see families that look like them come and rebuild, and then alongside what EJI is doing. So the neighborhood is changing very slowly. And I tell people we don't have to be afraid of the word gentrification. We just have to do it properly and respectfully. We can change neighborhoods without displacing people and making them unlivable. So that is the work. My work in historic preservation right now is focused on recapturing land in my community and making them livable spaces and remove and remove, that's my son, sorry, and removing blight while caring about the neighborhood.
That's amazing. What is, you mentioned EJI. What is that organization?
So that's the Equal Justice Initiative. That's
Okay.
one of the organizations that Abby remarked on. So that Brian Stevens. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so, all of his work that he's doing with the incarcerated, and then he created a bunch of museums because what was happening um, years ago was that the previous mayors were ignoring the history tourism that we were getting as a neighborhood, as a city. They were ashamed. They wanted to bury the civil rights history. And so over time, Mr. Stevenson had been getting markers put up all over. And people were coming here, and during periods of what they call anti-tourism, that's when people aren't going to the beach or something like that. They were coming here to learn about all of this history. And he was slowly getting this stuff marked secretly and privately because they didn't want the stuff to be public. And so fast forward, and then we were having all of these sellouts of hotel rooms. People were like, who's coming to Montgomery? And so it took for a committee that also part of the guy that I told you guys had helped start the organization my husband worked for, he was in those meetings. And they were like, people are coming here to learn about the history of Montgomery, the civil rights history, the Confederate history, all of the stuff. And so it took for a monetary dangling of a carrot, so to speak, to get those mayors, that particular mayor on board to allowing EJI then to come and erect monuments that would be very vocal about the treatment of African Americans in this space through lynching and all around the country. And so, fast forward, we have our first Black African American mayor, who is, we're all about now unveiling these stories. And so EJI is a great part of that work. He has brought so much economic development and change to the landscape of Alabama in a very short time and in a way that he cannot be censored by the government, which is great because we're seeing a lot of museums, be shuttered or censored, and he's not because of the way he was able to um, be somewhat financially independent. And so that's part of the conversation here too within groups. In my friends group is, hey, we have to find a way to lean on our allies, but also find a way to be economically advantaged so that we can be the help that our community needs because we can't rely on the government. We're going to have to be able to lean and strengthen our communities the way they once were, where we can survive no matter what's happening in the federal, landscape.
Thank you so much. There's a question from Adrian, and they ask, do you see this as a sustainable ritual on an annual basis? And if so, do you see it as static or evolving?
So my prayer is that it can be an annual thing. We're asking people, even if they don't host it on Juneteenth, because the difference is with Passover, it was kind of set in history and it was a mandate, where this is not a mandate. So that's different. So what I'm asking people is if you pick a date, and I list a few dates in the book, Juneteenth is the big one for me, but let your community settle on that date so that it's an annual tradition. Because one of the big things within the African American culture too is family reunions. So if you're making this a part of your family reunion, do it every year at the same time so that it holds a place for you. Um, and evolving. I would love to see it evolve the same way that I feel like the baton was passed to me to create this for African Americans. I would love to see this deal across the entire slave trafficking routes, and also even current as groups are who have experienced similar captivity be able to add to their, add this type of thing to their story, if that makes sense. This
Right.
this this way of holding place.
Can I just say that this is such an amazing program? I'm so honored to be able to be part of this interfaith group. And I have to leave because I have another Zoom, but I'll see you on the 14th. Bless you all.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Gigi. So good to
Bye.
see you.
You
Thank you.
too. Bye bye. Thank you.
I do not
It
have a
is
question.
amazing.
I do not have a question, but I would like to commend you for your intentional, purposeful method of building bridges. And I want to encourage you and I want to thank you for what you're doing. I believe every little thing we do to enhance our relationship with others, it's a wonderful thing. And I want to commend you for that. And thank you very much.
Thank
Pam,
you.
see you tonight. I'll be at the library.
Thank you.
See you later. Bye.
All right.
Yeah, it is wonderful. Is the book, April, is it basically the Haggadah, and can people get the book and then know how to do this ritual themselves? Is that
Yeah.
how? Okay.
Yeah, so we just ordered a bunch of copies. We had sold out. So Abby will have them and be pre-selling it, the copies. So you guys can get in touch with her about those. In the ceremony itself, we use a more condensed version. The book that we sell is more of a full, like, coffee table,
Like, like a piece of art. And, just like you don't read everything in the Haggadah you use, at least we don't.
Me neither.
Yeah.
From it, but it's a beautiful piece of work and history and art to keep for your family.
Yeah, and it's a good condensed history lesson for people to just kind of get an idea of uh just the different important intellectuals and artisans that were, a part of our were and are part of our community. So that is the book. And again, in the actual events, we use a condensed version that's more handled than that one. So
Got it.
that's the work.
Understood.
Yeah.
And how do you get the book?
You can order it through Journeys to Change. I think we'll put our website back on, and you should follow us on Instagram. We're going to have an order page, or you can email us. And we'll either, if you're in the New York area, arrange to drop them off, or if you're out of the New York area, we'll ship them to you.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. And so she's even positioning where if groups want to buy bulk so that they can have it prior and do it as a study, you guys can do that as well.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
So we've come to the top of the hour. It's really been such a wonderful discussion. Thank you both so much. I'm so inspired by the work both of you are doing, and so grateful to be able to collaborate with you. And I can't wait for the 14th to experience it myself firsthand. And I hope some of you can join us there as well. So thank you both very much. It's really wonderful work that you're doing.
No, thank you all very, very much for I'm excited. I can't wait to share it and see. It's been really cool to get the feedback from people who are even incorporating the telling into their own Passover. Some I'll get pictures and things, and that's pretty cool too. And families that are African American families that are keeping it alive. Even the Muslim families that have attended, their experience, the feedback was so fantastic, just in being willing to sit and understand. And they're like, man, we got so much out of these experiences. So I'm looking forward to sharing more with more communities. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for coming to the hour.
Thank you. Thank you very much.